Jiannan, I'm sure you got some stories to tell us. Help us to understand how you got the idea and how the business has been running. No commercial promotion for the company.
Okay, so I started with a student who majoring mathematics and computer engineering. I love technology so much, so I made a lot of technology products during my study in United States and in Oxford. So after that, I was involved into some educational programs, and I found myself really interested in education. And after that, I tried to actually use technology to scale and improve experiences in education.
Right.
And then I got the idea of starting up in China because the Chinese market is growing very big. So in 2014, I was about to graduate.
So what do you do?
So we do innovation.
This is like a 30-second presentation to your future investors. So how about that 30 seconds? Tell us what exactly you do and what is your potential.
We think that the Chinese education system has a lot to improve in terms of students' experience and the educational content. And we really hope to design very good innovation education content for schools and individuals.
Okay, Mr. Saito, I'm sure you have listened to these kind of speeches many times a day as an investor. What do you make of this fresh insights that our Chinese young entrepreneur Jiannan has about his potential? And meanwhile, this new generation of entrepreneurs in China and beyond.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing. And one of the important things that I just heard was that it was experience that was studying overseas and then bringing it back to China. I think that entrepreneurs, especially in Asia, they just do it in Asia and not have the context of things overseas. And then when they want to create something scalable, they don't do such a great job. So I think that you have a great case right there of something that's internationally minded, looking at issues both globally and also in China. And that's definitely a mark of very good entrepreneurs. But the growth here, I think, is very important for society. The percentage you just show, though, does show differences in culture and background and how countries and people see entrepreneurship.
On the other hand, Andy, here in Beijing, we've seen those very encouraging stories and very encouraging entrepreneurs in China very frequently, shall I say, these days. However, one thing needs to bear in mind, 80%, that is at least the failure rate of young entrepreneurs and their businesses. What exactly is the reality?
Well,
from a seasoned entrepreneur like you.
Well, I would say that, I've been an entrepreneur, but also an investor as well. And what we tell entrepreneurs that we work with is failure is the default mode, meaning expect to fail. So I think that's the first point. The second point is it's important to make a distinction between entrepreneurs and what we would call maybe wantrepreneurs, in that it's so sexy now to say you're an entrepreneur. But I think the reality is that entrepreneurship is a lifestyle choice, and any particular project, company you're working on most likely will fail. But if you use that as a learning experience and keep going, entrepreneurs, I think, ultimately are successful as long as they persevere.
Jiannan, do you really like that lifestyle? I know it's very exhausting, first of all, and you keep on failing. It sounds easy, but in real time, when it's being translated into real time, it is very tough. I'm sure 1 year into entrepreneurship, you're still having a lot of hope.
Right. So when you do startups, you have a lot of ups and downs. So you are really exhausted sometimes, but most of the time you're very exciting, and you see the progresses you make in your business, and that's what we really enjoy.
But Mr. Saito, things are much more complicated than just pure determination and the will to do good, because one has to have a very successful business model. There has to be a good business environment. The economy has to be doing quite well in most cases. And the entrepreneurs themselves has to be very strong-minded and be able to endure failures, as Andy talked about. All of this combined, these conditions are very hard to be all in one package. Are we in the ideal time, or actually the so-called quote-unquote golden era has already left us a little bit behind?
I think it's actually a really exciting time that to be an entrepreneur, you don't have to make big factories or have huge investments, that someone with a keyboard can actually put an application together and affect millions all the way across the world.
Well, those are
and
the
make money at
successful
this.
ones.
And so
Let's
I
not
think
forget
that-
about that, William. Those are the successful ones
Yes.
only.
Yes. Yes, no, and I totally realize this, but I think though that any entrepreneurial activity that especially has a global impact, that is sustainable, that will make some sort of impact even at a country basis, will involve some level of ICT. And that allows efficiencies that were never seen in prior generations. So not only is it easier, but at the same time, as an entrepreneur, you have a higher risk of competitors coming in and undoing this. But it also means that older companies have lots of faster moving challengers. So I think right now is a very unique time, and I think that it is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs to make this a success. But it's really the end game at how these entrepreneurs call what is success. That it's not necessarily just an IPO, but it might be an acquisition by another company, but it might be merging.
Right.
So it's how you define success. But as it was just mentioned, failure is not necessarily the end game. I think that if you stop, it's true failure, but it's the experience that you gain from this, getting back up and trying again, that really makes the mark.
Andy, in China, there's many factors contributing to the government's willingness to encourage entrepreneurship in this country. Of course, innovation is one thing, and meanwhile, the university churn out huge number of graduates. These guys and girls have to have jobs for their future, and they have to have something to look forward to. And thirdly, the Chinese economy has been growing with double digits for quite some years. So it seems that the economy is able to absorb, but things have been changing. For example, economic growth rate going down, and meanwhile, even though the government is providing a lot of encouraging policies, things are also changing when it comes to realities of entrepreneurs. So what do you make of the real reality check that these entrepreneurs who want to be entrepreneurs really need to have these days, Andy?
Yeah, well, I think William makes a great point about defining what do we mean by success as an entrepreneur. The IPOs, the so-called unicorns, billion-dollar valuations are actually very rare. What I think is important from a Chinese government policy perspective is that most entrepreneurs actually cannot raise venture capital financing, but that doesn't mean that they don't have successful businesses that could be making 10 million, 50 million, 100 million RMB revenue a year, that in a sense are creating real value for their communities and the country. And creating jobs for themselves and their employees. So in this way, I think the government support and encouragement for entrepreneurship is a very positive thing for the economy.
Jiannan, you've seen successful stories being advocated on Chinese media repeatedly. Jack Ma from nobody who failed enormous many times in his entrepreneurship time and now become the richest man in this country. However, those are very few of those who have been successful. So what do you make of the environment and the cultural belief these days, some say even naively having, about the future of entrepreneurship? As a young man, just fresh out of university, what is the blueprint you really want to have for yourself?
So my blueprint is really to continue with my venture, not necessarily to be not failing, but to continue my venture on what I want to do. So as an entrepreneur, I think the most important thing is you recognize the opportunities in the market, as well as you recognize what you yourself want to do. And the combination of these two will make you more mature in terms of choosing the right things to do. And also, as an entrepreneur, one important aspect will be great leadership. So if you have a great vision, you get the right team, and you persist on what you're doing. you eventually will make something, not necessarily IPO companies,
Right.
but a good, great business.
You know, Willem, I've been meeting a lot of these very courageous and brave young men and women, such as Jiannan, as Chinese entrepreneurs. But one thing really has to be mentioned here, whether it is going to be sustainable. One of the things people talk about entrepreneurship in China is the kinds of innovation, the kind of business model they are having in mind and for the future are workable or not. A lot are adaptive innovation, that's fine with it. However, it seems to be a lot of repeated cases and therefore adding to the danger of failure, if I could just be frank here. William, how would you draw the comparison of what's going on now in China to, let's just say, in Silicon Valley and also in Japan? And what kind of lessons do you think we need to learn from those periods of time?
No, I think you make a very good point, but the point you made exactly is what it is, that you actually in China have an environment that allows for these experiments. That I always say it's not possible to have innovation without failure. That countries that want to do innovation yet want to minimize failure, these are mutually exclusive. You can't have one without the other. And so to have an environment that allows for experimentation and people failing and to get back up, that's a great thing. And conversely, in a country like Japan, you have the opposite, where an educational system promotes test taking and it really abhors risk and it makes failure a bad word. And so when people graduate from college, they're expected to go into a rigid age-based society where you have these very large established companies and taking that safe route. That the entrepreneurial numbers that you see there, I think it actually might be on the high end, because as a society, it's very bad to be seen as they say in Japanese, the nail that sticks out, and you get hit, you get pounded back in. And so I think that it's very important for governments and people like this to understand that they're not able to pick winners, that innovation is important, but innovation only comes through failure, and that the best thing they can do is to foster this area where failure is not seen as a bad thing, that people are able to get back up and try again. And we see when you have these really maturing economies that tend to be age-based, that you don't want to take these risks, because if you take risks, nothing good happens. If you don't take risks, you still raise and go up, as they say, the escalator here. Silicon Valley, I think you see that mix, and you see ebbs and flows and ups and downs and so on. And so it's definitely a different maturity cycle. And then I think China, I think you see a whole area where it's a gold rush in a sense that allows for this to happen, which I think is a good thing.
The question is how long the gold rush will last. The Chinese premier and the top leadership of the country has been very encouraging to the younger generation of entrepreneurs, but people are also looking at the realities, wondering whether the coffee is really getting cold. One analogy people draw about entrepreneurship. Andy, I know you have been an advocate of entrepreneurship in China. You know, you will say everything's fine, but I want you to do some real reality check. Meanwhile, talking about the sustainability of this idea.
Sure. Well, I think it's not the beginning of the end, and it's maybe not even the end of the beginning.
Wow,
in
it
terms
sounds
of
very
the
philosophical, I have to say.
age of entrepreneurship in China. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. So first of all, China still has big markets and a lot of money. So one important trend that we're seeing is VCs in China acquiring technologies in the US that have limited potential there, bringing them to China, providing their own money, government money and support to rapidly grow. So I think that's a huge positive for both young entrepreneurs in China as well as more experienced ones. Second, we look at this One Belt, One Road initiative that is creating one pan-Eurasian integrated market that includes something like 70% of the world's GDP, more than 50% of the world's population, including some of the fastest growing economies like China and India. So a lot of that is being driven out of China. So as China, through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, building hard infrastructure, that's going to create market opportunities for Chinese entrepreneurs. So while I don't want to sound too Pollyannish, because clearly capital markets are in a negative downturn right now. There are challenges, but still very optimistic.